standardize my diet into 2 containers. One is protein powder, the other one is vegetables, smashed, mixed oils, spices, and additionally I have 2 supplements, which are a multivitamin and mineral, and the other one is omega-3 fatty acids. Now here are some of the conclusions I have drawn this far. First of all, I can prepare for an entire week, and then I don't have to worry about food if I don't want to. I don't have to run to the grocery store to get additional supplies because it is exactly planned. Now, this powder here has some downsides in terms of digestion. My digestion still hasn't properly adapted. What kind of solved the problem for me, at least partially, was to add more caraway, because as with lentils and so on and so forth, this is a vegan protein powder, so what is included here is pea protein, for example. And for this reason, I think it's a little bit similar in terms of digestion, and adding more caraway or in general other spices might also decrease the negative side effects of trying to digest something like this. Now, on the other side here, this here is contains also vinegar. And if I now mix them both together, I can have 2 options. The first one is to make something that's a little solid by just mixing these both. So this is kind of, now it's also frozen, but it's also more on the solid side, I would say. And this obviously is also solid. The main thing why I don't mix them already, of course this would be more beneficial in terms of prepping the meals and having them very easy to go, is that I only have a limited freezer space in which I can only fit 7 of these glasses. These glasses are ones I got from the supermarket. So here was applesauce, and they also have the same glasses for vegetables. So if you want to get similar glasses, maybe just look in the vegetable department. Let's talk time. If I eat 3 times a day, which I can now very easily, because what I previously did, I tried to fast all day. The main problem with fasting is that if you are hungry and you enter multiple stages of hunger, so maybe the first stage of hunger after a morning walk or the morning run or after you wake up, then maybe a second stage in when it is usually lunchtime, and then maybe in the evening you enter a third stage. Maybe if you worked out quite intensely in the morning, or you have an additional evening workout, then for me, if I usually then eat at 8 to 10, this results in me being maybe somewhat very hungry when I'm actually working out. One of the main principles with this is that I drastically increased the amount of protein I ate. Whereas before, I averaged maybe in between, let's say 50 to 100 grams of protein, but I usually didn't. And this is also not a bioavailable protein. So if you take peanuts, for example, you might think, oh, peanuts have a lot of protein. Here is the problem. The bioavailability is only around 52. Basically, if you have 50 grams of protein, what your body is getting is 25. And that's not good. Because you actually would need way more peanuts. But peanuts come with a certain micronutrient distribution. This being that they also contain a lot of fat. Now, fat is twice as energy dense as the other two, as carbohydrates and as protein. The reason I try to avoid carbohydrates is that they decrease my mental ability up to a point where I am mentally less stable, where I am more moody, where I am more aggressive, where I am more emotional. For example, if I recently, or not recently, but if I ingested carbs like an hour before and I would now record this, I myself, if I watched the video, could see the difference in how I speak and so on and so forth. So therefore, for this reason, I try to limit carbs to 50 grams. Now, this is something I try to do, but here's the problem now if you want to do it plant-based, without the protein powder and with whole foods. With every gram of protein you need, and with plant protein, the bioavailability is just maybe in between from 50 to 80 on average, or maybe in between 50 to 70% of the 1 gram of protein you need. So now there are different recommendations for protein intake. I would say they range from anywhere from 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight up to 2.6 grams. I think that's on the maximum, or 2.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, if we assume that I weigh 80 kilos, which I currently don't, but in terms of working these numbers out, it's easier, then I would need, on the high side, 2.5, it's 160, and then again another 40, I would need 200 grams of protein. Let's just say I want to be on the high side of protein. And you would need 200 grams of bioavailable protein, not just protein. So this means if I now duplicate this by, let's say, if I wanted to get this protein from peanuts, then this would result in me having to eat, in short, I don't want to calculate it right now, but I calculated it already. In short, it would lead to me also consuming a lot of the fat and also a lot of the carbs that come with peanuts. What this would result is in me tripling or doubling my caloric intake if I want to hit bioavailable protein. With peanuts, I would have to consume basically 400 grams of peanut protein, which then results in about 200 grams of bioavailable protein. Of course, now it's only one protein source. That's also maybe potentially another bottleneck. What I'm trying to say with this is there is basically no option other than eating like 15 eggs or 20 eggs in a given day, or consuming just curd all day long, or cottage cheese, which I did try, but it didn't really work out. And I also don't want to have, with every 200 grams of cottage cheese, one of these plastic containers, and with every 500 grams of curd, also one of these plastic containers, because I try to reduce my waste. So, since this is not something I really want to do, and I also noticed some negative side effects mentally from eating too much dairies, I don't know if this is just a nocebo effect or if this effect actually has some evidence behind this. There also seems to be a slight effect of dairies increasing inflammation in general, but that's like, if you ask the internet, then there are like 3 different peoples, and these just tell you 3 different things. Of course, there are also maybe studies on this, but I try to base my opinion upon at least something that is scientific, so therefore basically on Andrew Huberman, you could say at this point in time. Funny. Now, what this allows me also to do is, let's say I fast all day. I manage to fast all day. If this is the day, this is the when I sleep, then what I can do at night basically, I can visit the gym and I can take this nutrition with me. For this reason, I have 2 of these shakers which stem from me trying Pure, and there is 1 free shaker you get, and I bought 2 additional ones actually, but I only use 2. Now, here is the problem. These don't exactly fit in here. There is just too much protein powder. This protein powder is from Bulk. It is 8 scoops, and every scoop has 35 grams of total mass, and 25 grams of it is protein, which also makes it very easy to calculate. If I want to now hit 200 grams at least of total protein, not bioavailable protein, and that's actually what I'm trying to aim for, because that also very conveniently works out if I then order 4 of 2.5 kilogram bags from Bulk Powder over a year. And since the year has 52 weeks, but calculated on only 4 weeks, it would only be 48 weeks. Therefore, you have to account for the last 4 weeks, basically, which are spread evenly, not very evenly, over the whole year. And I also obviously wanted to standardize when I order, and that's then the beginning of the month. I figured I'd just take 8 scoops, 200 grams of protein, which then maybe results in the bioavailability of this protein, maybe let's say it's 75%. So this means from the 200 grams, I probably have 150 grams of bioavailable protein, maybe a little bit less. This for me then again results in probably around the 2 grams per kilogram of body weight range, depending on how much I weigh and so on and so forth. But I think I'm on the safe side here. What I also majorly noticed is that I am not hungry anymore. It's not that I'm not hungry anymore. There is also a very decreased hunger and a very decreased craving, because what I allowed myself is, and that's kind of the bypass for the not hungry anymore, is I just allowed myself to eat whenever I want to eat. So if it's in the morning and I was out for the run and I now want to eat, previously I couldn't, because every time I ate, I usually tend to also eat carbs, and then maybe I also tended to overeat, which then caused me mentally to obviously judge myself for overeating, because that's just not something that's optimal. And so for this reason, I didn't really know how much to eat, and I constantly had also to control how much I eat. But since this is now prepared, and the only thing that is currently at least in the fridge is 7 of these portions, of course depending on the day of the week, this is easy. This is what I eat in a given day. And if I eat more than this, then this takes away from tomorrow's me wanting to eat. So this is a very simple calculation. It's so simple that basically you can understand it like this is what you eat today and tomorrow and so on and so forth. It also, because it now is standardized and because it is the same taste every single day, the novelty effect of food, of switching in between different foods, is also reduced, you could say. So normally, if you then again went to the grocery store and you saw something different, or you switch in between sweet stuff and then spicy stuff, and then maybe you switch to dairies and so on and so forth, then you also have this food novelty, which also releases dopamine, at least in the short term. But if you have something that is very similar and very bland, then you really only eat when you actually need to eat. And therefore, your body's signals, or your body's signaling system of when to eat, and not really much more what to eat, because what to eat isn't really influenced then anymore by your actual rational decisions, usually. Of course, if you are not eating this, then it's different. But since it is not influenced by this so much anymore, it is just easier. As an example, yesterday, for example, I already was hungry in the morning, therefore I took these 2. And since I was at home, and I am at home, so I'm only not at home usually in the evening, then, or at home / in the office / in the studio, whatever you want to call it. It's basically the apartment I rent and I also use as an office space. Now, if I go out in the evening, and that's usually going to a library, then I can't just take this with me. Be aware that this might not fit into these 2 Joule shakers. These 2 Joule shakers, if you account the total volume, are each 0.96 liters approximately. If you only fill them up to here, then it's 500 milliliters, I guess. So it's about 2 liters of volume. Now, in terms of volume in general, because this is already smashed, it's already mixed, this decreases the volume. It also decreases how much you need to digest, because if you don't have a full broccoli, which you didn't properly chew in you, then it just goes through you quicker. There also seems to be a huge downside to meal shakes in general, which is that liquid food is not absorbed as well as other kinds of foods. Now, of course, there are downsides to this. You're eating the same thing every single day. Now, ideally, you would check your blood values and so on and so forth, your testosterone, your hormones, but it's very expensive, and for this reason, I simply don't do it. And it's also time expensive. It also costs a lot of time to visit the doctor regularly. And at this point in time, it just doesn't make financial sense to check my levels you should, theoretically, every 3 months, but it is not standard practice. And if I go to the doctor, then he's like, what? Why would you want to do this? So for this reason, I currently don't do it. What I do monitor is obviously my health, kind of with a fitness tracker, and also whenever I have blood draws, sometimes I ask for additional values and then I also pay these additional values. But obviously, if you pay, for example, for a complete blood measuring, then it costs you, at Inside Tracker, for example, a private company that offers something like this, it costs you anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for one single session, and that's very expensive. What this also allows me to do is now to have a better diet, actually. Why? Because I'm bad at making these choices. I guess everybody is bad at making complex choices like food, which influences basically your longevity, your lifespan, how you are able to focus, to sleep the next day, and so on and so forth. And by having a very strong default, I basically replaced a lot of the other meals I would have consumed, where I also constantly would have needed my rational willpower to decide at which point I stop eating, at which point I go to the grocery store again, at which point I switch the food and then come up with something else because the last thing didn't work, and so on and so forth. I don't need to make these choices anymore. To a large extent, I can just rely on this. And the rule I set up for myself is that if I want to, I can buy anything at any time. Since grocery stores are open basically 6 days a week, and even on Sunday, where I live, there is a train station nearby where there is a normal grocery store, which even has open on Sunday. So if I really need to, then of course I can waste additional 2 hours of my day and not do something productive in that time period and just get groceries, even if I already have this. And another big benefit of having something like this ready, and also ready in terms of time. So this means you don't have to prepare your meal for 30 minutes, for 40 minutes, and therefore take away time during the workday. If now, after this video, I'm hungry, then I just open one of these and pour in a little bit of this here. Ideally, it would already be not frozen anymore, but I took it out of the freezer too late. So usually, I guess the ideal range would be if in the freezer, if you store it for the next 24 hours in the freezer after you take it out, in the fridge, after you take it out of the freezer, then 24 hours, I guess, would be fine. If you additionally want to boil it or something like this in the water heater, or you heat it up in the microwave, which of course you can't really, but you can take off the lid and then heat it up in the microwave, you can. But I do not have a microwave. This would make the whole thing more convenient. The reason I don't have a microwave is for simplicity reason, for cost reason. Basically, not really so much for cost reason, but of course, the less stuff I have, the less stuff I have to maintain, and the less of my capital or money is bound in stuff I own, and the more of my money and capital can actually work for me and create interest for me, which is nice because this means I have to spend less time in the future, at least worrying about money and also working for money. In total, I tried very many things in the last years. The main stages are, first of all, I tried to standardize my nutrition. The first meal I standardized was the breakfast. I just standardized it with oats and fruits and so on and so forth, and milk usually. Now, this was the first thing I did. Now, what I did realize eventually is that there was something else I could standardize, which was the lunch and the dinner. So therefore, for this reason, I basically made up meals for the entire week, got 20 or 30 boxes that I could store in the freezer at the place I lived previously, a student apartment. I was actually the one kind of managing, not the house entirely, but I was managing partially the students, you could say, or I was a spokesperson for the people there. And therefore I could also buy a gigantic freezer in which I then put all of my frozen boxes. So I basically had one freezer department for me because I was also the one that just got this freezer and not really bought it from my money, but of course I also used my car and so on and so forth. What this allowed me to do is meal prep for an entire week, but I still obviously needed to cook. So this took me usually 2 to 3 hours every single Sunday, and of course also the planning that is involved in this. Also, I didn't yet know how to use a microwave yet, so therefore what I did often is I went to university, for example, and in university, when it was lunchtime, I just ate frozen food because I forgot to take it out of the freezer. In university, obviously, you just can also go to the Mensa, which might potentially even be a cheaper option. And if you think about the time investment it takes to meal prep, then going to the Mensa, also the social aspect of eating there with friends, might be beneficial. Of course, you can also usually eat at the Mensa or at a, I don't know if there is another word for this specific kind of a restaurant at universities, usually subsidized. And of course, you can also take out your lunchbox sometimes. Then we enter the stage where I discovered fasting. I tried fasting before, but it didn't work for me. So what I tried instead is to slowly extend. What I realized eventually is the reason fasting didn't work was because of my carb-high nutrition. Once I then figured out to either not eat for longer periods of time, after which I entered ketosis, and also after the big picture, my body was adapted to ketosis more and more, at least I guess so, maybe also as a child already, but since I drank apple juice all day as a child, probably I just burned a lot of carbohydrates all the time, and maybe I was on a sugar high for my entire youth. Now, fasting has also its side effects, such as the keto flu. It's basically you feeling sick just because of natrium and potassium and the balance, and also salt and so on and so forth, and the imbalance of you and also your body not knowing what to do and how to burn fat even for longer periods of time. What I eventually realized is if I wanted to fast, because I wanted to increase or have increased mental performance, basically the keto or fasting high, and this continuously over time would of course also mean that I would be able to concentrate better. I could use a higher percentage of my mind basically by switching my diet. And once I realized this, I then tried a lot of different things, such as being also vegetarian, which is something I decided almost 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago. I just decided to go vegetarian. I just decided to try it and prolonged it until now, basically. Because of me, it was not a taste choice, it was a choice for the environment, but I don't want to bore anyone by this choice. So therefore I just didn't, but obviously I just did. And then I tried vegetarian, and also I tried to get rid of dairies. I tried to basically approximate a vegan diet, but it just didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work. I tried fasting. I had these very fasting lows at which I couldn't even, like at half the speed, ride my bike, for example, at which sometimes my body was just so low in energy, or I just was so low in temperature that I just froze all the time, even in summer. These were some of the experiments, some of the adventures, you could say. What I eventually realized is this. In order to decrease hunger and in order to decrease you getting basically a ghrelin rise every now and then, which is the hunger hormone, you need to get rid of the meals, but also mostly of the carbs. If you eat fat and protein, then it is a lot satiating in the long term, a lot more satiating in the long term, meaning not for the next 2 hours or 4 hours, but for the next 8 hours, potentially 16 hours. And what you then can do is, if you eat, you can basically wait for 3 days without experiencing these very big hungers you have inside of you, you could say, that almost are like, oh, I need to eat something. And compared to this, on a ketogenic diet, it's like more, oh yeah, I'm hungry now. I could eat something, or I just wait for 20 minutes and then it's gone. So the time you spend in a hungry state goes down. The mental negative side effect of being hungry also goes down. And for this reason, I tried to then reduce my carbs. But in a plant-based diet, or approximating a plant-based diet, also trying to avoid dairies because of waste and also because of the supposed effect on inflammation, which I realized again and again. Every time I switch back to more and more carbs, what I realized is, if this is my allergy symptoms basically, it could be completely anecdotal. And of course it is, because I'm only one person. But every time I switch back to a very high diet, such as pasta, such as eating honey again, and so on and so forth, in summer, for example, on ketosis or on a ketogenic diet, my symptoms drastically decreased. But then every time I went back, it's like, oh yeah, here's a spike. And then I went back and then here's a spike. So it was too obvious. Of course, not totally obvious. It is just an assumption of mine that my body's inflammation responses and over-inflammation responses were also correlating to my diet in some way or another. So what I tried is basically eating mostly nuts for protein, and then plus vegetables, and then plus something like tomatoes and fresh vegetables, plus oils, usually plant-based oils. And I avoided dairy products, and I also usually didn't eat dairies or anything else like eggs anymore. I also try to avoid eggs. Then I realized this didn't work out. I was constantly hungry. I couldn't perform mentally or physically up to the standard which I set previously by myself. Historically, I couldn't lift that much weight anymore, and so on and so forth. In retrospective, this was due to me constantly being hungry, due to my body trying to switch from carbohydrates to ketosis and so on and so forth, but the switch was probably not very effective. This is called metabolic flexibility, how able you are to switch in between those states of fat burning, ketosis, but also burning carbohydrates as fuel. Then, about 1 year ago, I started to reintroduce eggs, because eggs have just a very good nutritional profile, and also they are high in protein. Previously, before I tried even without nuts, but the problem with nuts is the macronutrient ratio. Even though you get a lot of protein, because there is so much fat in nuts, means that you cannot get enough bioavailable protein. And before I was like, yeah, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. What I didn't calculate is the bioavailability, the low bioavailability of plant-based protein. And what I also didn't calculate is maybe because I have lifted since age 12 basically, or did at least some kind of strength training, and additionally I had like endurance workouts, maybe I should be on the higher side of what people would recommend. And therefore the 0.8 grams multiplied by, let's say, 80 would result in you 48 grams, no, not 48, 64 grams of protein, which I usually hit with my nuts. But this idea was nuts. And the mistake I made is I had too many carbs, too little protein, and too high fat. I mean, fat sounds nice, ketosis and so on and so forth. But if this means that if your body wants a certain amount of protein, and it only can get it if there is also, with every gram of protein comes this fat bar you also need to eat, then it would be a reasonable assumption that your body would make you eat until you hit the protein you need. Of course, you could also make the same argument for the carbs, but you don't need the carbs. Your body can produce carbs on its own, from protein, from fat, but it cannot produce the essential amino acid protein on its own. It also can produce the essential fats. So you can get rid of the carbs without major negative side effects. Of course, depending on how you previously ate and so on and so forth. But your body can make its own carbs. Now, therefore, why not just focus on the one thing that's limiting basically the whole equation? It's protein. It's bioavailable protein. And therefore, I thought about switching back to meat. But I didn't want to switch back to meat. For one, because I was not good at prepping meals and of cooking and at portioning my meals. I didn't have a problem with this actually until a few years ago. Until I had multiple lifestyle changes that led to me probably, and also maybe because I wanted to be vegetarian and I had too little protein because I didn't eat meat anymore, and so on and so forth. And I also wanted to fast, but I couldn't really fast because of the high carb intake. And also then this resulting in me, for example, doing chores around the house for an entire day, or working basically outside for an entire day, physical work like renovating things, for example, and just not having any energy left at all. Seemingly, at least that's kind of the perception I was running. Additionally, over the last years, I spent way too much time cooking, not meal prepping anymore. I kind of meal prepped, but not really, because you cannot really meal prep the thing I wanted to meal prep, because I had more or less then a smaller freezer and so on and so forth. And also I just thought it would be more fun and engaging. That's maybe the wrong description. To have like 1 hour in a given day where I would prep my salad and then prep my cooked meal, and then I would just eat it within the 1 hour, maybe talk to friends, maybe cook with friends and so on and so forth. It just was too mentally draining. I couldn't focus too much on other tasks, or not as much as I could if I just had a diet that would lead to me not being hungry all day long. Of course I wasn't hungry all day long, but that's kind of sometimes the perception, the negative perception you then have. Okay, I cannot eat right now, and blah, blah, blah. It's just your mind making you do stupid things. And this also increases cravings. But if instead you have something like this, and every time you're already hungry, you just eat like a third of it and keep the rest for the rest of the day, then you don't need to think about food for the next hours anymore. It's just such an easy solution. But of course, the downside of a easy solution that is not as customized as this, at least customized for myself as this, then the downside is that your mental performance then goes down. And if I now eat carbs, or if I would eat a lot of carbs, then my mental performance just would drain by 10, 20, 30%, and I would be less likely to do actually the things that I want to do. If this is a spectrum of me being able and also wanting to do the things that I actually set out to do, then I noticed that if I'm on a high carb, high fat diet and low carb diet, then I just want to do the things I actually set out to do. But instead, if I'm more on carbs, then I'm like, yeah, but I could also watch YouTube for the next 6 hours, even though I cannot in terms of time, even though it doesn't make sense at all, or I just don't want to do anything anymore. And that's a state at which I don't want to be in, because the more problems you don't solve, the more problems you have to solve in the future. Therefore, if you then have a set, fixed, given set of problems, and then additionally you have the problems from the past adding up, then of course you would have to increase your performance constantly in order to still meet the demands, which of course probably isn't possible, because you just cannot increase your performance from one day to the other by like 10% to just accommodate for the 10% if it's just 10% of tasks that are still left from the previous day. Nutrition is such a big topic because it influences how one thinks, at least how I think. It influences literally how I see the world, how I perceive the world, how I see something like recording a video like this. Either it's fun, either it's okay, it's mentally demanding and I like it and so on and so forth, or it's like, I don't want to do it, I just don't want to do it because of so many other reasons. Therefore, standardizing my nutrition like this also means now that I have to go to the grocery store less. And since our society, to a large extent, is based on food culture, but not only on food culture, but also on the incentive to make people eat more, because this drives revenue and therefore profit, therefore you have a big, gigantic problem. Not only I had a big, gigantic problem with my nutrition, probably, but also society in general. There are different estimates that like 40% of people in America, for example, are overweight or obese, and of just how difficult it is for these people. And there are, of course, different things regarding this. A very famous, not very famous, one of the most famous books regarding this is called Nudge. So here's an example. You are the head of a school cafeteria, and now you need to decide what to put first in the school cafeteria. Do you put the salad first and then people walk by and take the salad? Or do you put the pommes first? So basically the fries. Pommes is the German word for fries, which I just used. Now, depending on the order of the food, people will choose accordingly. People will first use the first thing and then maybe down the line realize that they have put too much on the plate and therefore just go. Now, the healthier the food's in the beginning, the healthier the diet of the pupils will be. So what is your role now? Do you decide that you want to optimize for longevity for the pupils, which also probably increases their ability to focus in short term? Or do you want to focus on profit and make maybe a brand deal with Big M and then position Big M's in here? Or do you even have, who even says you can decide something like this? Something that will affect hundreds of students at your school. And there are different approaches to this. And also the question is, how should the government do something about this? I think in UK there is now a sugar tax. In Germany, for example, we had a sugar tax until the late 70s, 80s or 90s, until it got abolished, you could say. And of course, these incentives and also just how businesses operate then again in return decide how these people will grow up eating, how their eating behaviors will be, if they will crave McDonald's when they are 35 or it is the salad instead. And there are so many different aspects to this question, like just in general productivity of all the people on this planet. If you think of one person being one human intelligence, if you decrease the intelligence of this one person by making them maybe, or I don't know to which extent there is a correlation between having a healthy body and having a healthy mind, or accessing the theoretical genetic potential for basically maximizing your intelligence and so on and so forth. Or not, maybe not your intelligence, but maybe just your performance over time. You could also call this work. Now, by decreasing how much food I needed from the grocery store, because this powder is something I get from a delivery service, basically not a delivery service, but the company, Bulk Powders, delivers this to me once a month, usually, because I order it once a month, but it's currently out of stock again, not nice. because this is kind of a constant, should be a constant in my life, obviously. I only need to go to the grocery store once a week. If I can only store 7 of these, if I get an additional freezer, which I'm thinking about, I don't really know if it makes sense, then I could even store potentially a whole month of these. And obviously I could also store as many of these as I like, or also store them in the bags in which they come in. The thinking about this is that it is already portioned, so therefore I don't need to portion it on an individual day. Therefore the decision of how much powder I take out is not something I decide, because it's already decided. And the same is true for the default in the cafeteria. If something is already decided, if you had a super healthy meal arriving every time at your door, directly in front of you, every time you were slightly hungry, then of course you wouldn't crave a lot of other things. Your cravings probably for shit food would go down. But if not, then, well, you just might run to the grocery store and buy a jar of... In conclusion, I do want to do things in life. I don't want to spend 2 hours in a day meal prepping, eating, washing the dishes. I almost wash no dishes anymore. I now do once a week, ideally. I prepare at least once a week these meals. And an additional thing in terms of calories is this here. I just calculated 2,000 calories for me daily, which is basically my metabolic base rate, which is around 180, plus the kind of activity I have when I just am here, I'm walking around a little bit, then I'm arriving at 2,000 calories I usually burn in between those two. There is also an argument to be made that most of these calorie tracking services overestimate by far how much calories you work out, for example, when you work out, or burn when you work out. So therefore, maybe this is even also on the higher side. But of course, 2,000 calories is the standard diet, which also means one of these shakers or one of these glasses, if I have them mixed in both glasses, is just 1,000 calories. Super easy. Now, if I work out properly, then I usually burn between the morning run currently and the evening workout, probably in between 250 to 500 calories. So this means I have 250 to 500 calories, which I can now additionally eat. Of course, you could also make this conditional. Only if you work out, eat these. Because if I eat consistently 2.5 thousand calories, but the only thing I do is sit in a room all day, then I obviously probably would also increase my body fat over time, given other fixed constraints. So what I could do is just make this optional. I could just say, okay, so this is already covered. This is covered by the default. But if I now work out super intense, then I could just say, okay, as a mental rule, I could allow myself to eat 500 additional calories. A salad, for example, 2 protein bars, maybe a few oats. Of course, oats don't work because of the carbs. But this is kind of the thinking. You could also eat like a yogurt, maybe even with some fruit if the fruit is not too high in sugar or in carbohydrates. But also if you already got the other things covered and it's also in the evening, then at least to my experience, the effect is not that noticeable compared to you eating only pasta for the whole day. Now, in total, this simplified my nutrition as simple as it can get. It would be even simpler if I had a gigantic freezer I could fill up for the next entire month, but as of now I don't, and therefore this is as easy as it can get. The separation between the two containers is because I need to keep these separate, because otherwise they would degrade faster. The protein powder doesn't degrade. Of course it does degrade if you have like moist in there, but usually I try to not have moist in there, and it also doesn't come with moist in it, which is nice. And the other part is obviously something you either could also preserve by cooking it, but the problem with cooking is that you get rid of a few nutrients, I guess, compared to freezing, where the nutrients are kept basically more, you could say. The final note is that I'm neither a nutritionist nor would I recommend this diet obviously to you. I just wanted to show this and share this. So don't copy it, I would say.